These are the missions that pushed SEAL Team 6 to the edge. Real footage, real operators, real consequences, raids, manhunts, and operations few have ever seen. Here are the top 5 DevGru operations. In April 2009, a crisis unfolded off the Horn of Africa that would place America's elite special operations forces at the center of international attention.
Pirates took the ship and kidnapped Captain Richard Phillips.
A U.S.-flagged cargo ship, the Maersk Alabama, was hijacked by Somali pirates approximately 240 nautical miles southeast of Isle. Though the ship's crew managed to retake control, the pirates escaped with the ship's captain, Richard Phillips, taking him hostage aboard a small covered lifeboat. It was a volatile situation playing out in international waters, and it demanded the involvement of the most capable special operations force the U.S. could deploy. That force was the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6. From the very beginning, this rescue mission involved 3 distinct elements within the unit, each with its own responsibilities and specialized capabilities: Gold Squadron, Red Squadron, and Gray Squadron. Together, these squadrons would converge on the Indian Ocean in a layered and rapidly evolving mission that demanded strategic flexibility, long-range logistics, and surgical precision. Gold Squadron was first on the scene. They had already been forward deployed in East Africa for other regional operations and were in proximity when the hijacking occurred. Their orders were clear: intercept the developing situation immediately, stabilize it, and prevent the pirates from reaching the Somali coast with the hostage. A small team from Gold Squadron, inserted via C-17 aircraft, conducting a night parachute jump into the Indian Ocean. With no backup and limited visibility, they landed in the water near the USS Bainbridge, the Navy destroyer already shadowing the lifeboat, and were recovered on board. Once aboard the Bainbridge, Gold Squadron immediately assumed command of tactical oversight. Their task was not to rescue the hostage yet, but to maintain pressure on the pirates and contain the situation at sea. They advised the ship's crew, coordinated standoff tactics, and gathered intelligence on the pirates' behavior and capabilities. Their efforts included using rotor wash from helicopters to disrupt the pirates' comfort and steering the Bainbridge in such a way that it created disorienting waves. Gold Squadron also conducted a form of close-in deception, approaching the lifeboat in disguised RIBS rigid inflatable boats, offering water and supplies under the guise of being Navy crew. This allowed them to assess the condition of the hostage and collect visual confirmation of pirate positions without escalating the confrontation. While Gold Squadron was already on station managing containment aboard the USS Bainbridge, a massive push was underway in the United States to get additional forces into the Indian Ocean quickly. The mission demanded more firepower, mobility, and technical support. Red Squadron, designated as the Direct Action Unit, and Gray Squadron, responsible for mobility and maritime transport, were activated together to deploy a heavy, flexible rescue package. What unfolded was one of the most complex and high-risk insertions SEAL Team 6 had ever attempted: a tandem squadron jump into open ocean in daylight with boats. Red Squadron was given just hours to assemble personnel, prepare gear, and load aircraft. The alert made it clear: an American hostage was being held at sea. This was the kind of crisis the command was built for. Over 100 members of Red Squadron were scrambled, along with boats, gear, and a carefully constructed manifest. Operators acted as loadmasters, juggling weight calculations, gear distribution, parachute counts, and emergency kits. The pressure was immense. The boats were overweight, manifest rosters had changed, and last-minute additions complicated the already tight schedule. The C-17 flight that followed carried not just Red Squadron's personnel, but their boats, and the entire jump was coordinated with Gray Squadron, who would operate those boats in the water. The boats included heavily modified rigid inflatable boats, RIBS, and larger high-speed crafts, fast, agile, and essential for navigating the open ocean with SEALs on board. These crafts were loaded with shock absorption gear, fuel supplies, and mobility kits needed for ship-to-ship and sea-to-land operations. Jumping in broad daylight over calm waters, the insertion was surgical but intense. From the rear ramp of the C-17, Gray Squadron's boats were deployed first. The release was powerful. The first boat dragged the second behind it by cable, pulling it down the fuselage before both were parachuted into the ocean. Following close behind were Red Squadron's operators, leaping from the aircraft with their own gear to land near the boats. The timing had to be perfect. Daylight made them visible, but it also allowed for better control of descent and landing. Operators steered canopies close to the parachuting boats, landing within reach of the watercraft and clambering aboard as fast as possible. Once in the boats, nerves gave way to action. Gray Squadron immediately took over boat operations, getting engines started and equipment configured. The RIBS and stealth boats were used to recover incoming SEALs from the water and head toward staging locations. A second pass dropped in the remainder of the task force. Some operators were even formally assigned into the unit. With the full squadron recovered and accounted for, the convoy of boats made its way to the USS Boxer, one of the supporting vessels in the operation. The boats were craned aboard and the SEALs were brought inside. Sailors on the ship had little idea who these heavily armed, bearded men in non-standard uniforms were. But space was cleared, and the operators were housed, fed, and prepped. Once staged, a portion of Red Squadron was immediately dispatched to the Bainbridge to begin surveillance and tactical coordination. The rest of the team continued rehearsals and planning aboard the Boxer. The mission wasn't about brute force, it was about adaptability. One plan involved amphibious insertion, swimming from small boats to the lifeboat if it drifted out of range. Multiple contingencies were built into the plan, and every operator was ready for rapid pivot. Gray Squadron, having delivered the boats and enabled the entire jump, remained an integral part of the mission. Their vessels were kept ready should a new phase of the rescue develop, including a scenario in which the hostage might be moved to land. They also facilitated short-range mobility, moving personnel between ships and preparing for possible fast insertion contingencies. This tandem jump, conducted in daylight over calm seas with full boat packages and support teams, was unprecedented in scale and precision. It showcased not only Red Squadron's lethal readiness, but Gray Squadron's unmatched maritime mobility. From the U.S. East Coast to the Somali Basin, they executed one of the boldest long-range insertions in special operations history. The staging was complete, the team was in place, and the final decision would soon be made. With the USS Bainbridge maintaining its vigil and SEALs Team 6 fully staged across naval platforms in the Indian Ocean, pressure mounted from every angle. The world was watching. The clock was ticking, and 3 squadrons, gold, red, and gray, were deep in the kind of tactical deliberation that only Tier 1 units can execute under such constraints. The objective was clear: rescue Captain Richard Phillips. But the route to that end was far from straightforward. In the closed, sweltering, and unpredictable lifeboat drifting behind the Bainbridge, 3 armed Somali pirates stood inches from their hostage. Any misstep would be fatal. What followed was a dynamic and adaptive planning process. While Red Squadron rehearsed action on objective procedures and sniper contingencies, and Gray Squadron coordinated full-spectrum ISR and communications, mission planners cycled through several possible courses of action. These weren't just hypothetical drills, they were real options, being weighed moment by moment as intelligence developed. One of the earliest concepts proposed was a beach-based interception. The pirates were at one point steering the lifeboat back toward the Somali coast. If they made landfall with the hostage, the rescue would shift from a maritime mission to a complex inland operation, risking prolonged captivity, political consequences, and a higher chance of mission compromise. So, a beach over the beach, OTB contingency was quietly prepared. SEALs from Red and Gray squadrons, supported by mobility specialists, readied for a scenario where they'd need to move ashore fast. Boats, beach charts, and helicopter support were prepped for a possible raid in Somalia itself. That option remained open as long as the pirates had control of the lifeboat's heading. But once the Bainbridge secured control of the lifeboat's tow line under the guise of drifting together for safety, the threat of a beach OTB raid began to fade. Still, the SEALs kept it in their back pocket, ready to pivot if needed. Another strategy explored was a top-down helicopter assault. The idea was to fly 2 helicopters low and fast over the lifeboat, fast rope SEALs onto the roof, breach the hatch, and overwhelm the pirates in seconds. The plan was bold, the kind that SEALs train for, but it also came with serious risk. The lifeboat was compact and closed and made of thick fiberglass. Firing into it without hitting the hostage was near impossible. One startled movement from a pirate, and the entire mission could end in tragedy. A third option involved underwater demolition. Navy SEALs, who trained for clandestine infiltration beneath ships, could swim to the lifeboat at night and rig shaped charges to disable the rudder or blow the hatch. This would create confusion or force the pirates to the surface, allowing for a strike. But again, the enclosed design of the lifeboat meant the shockwave could harm the hostage. Plus, the heat and lack of ventilation meant that any breach might provoke chaos rather than control. There was also a diversion and boarding tactic explored. SEALs in disguised boats such as RIBS and the more specialized craft brought in by Gray Squadron could deliver food, water, and supplies to lull the pirates into complacency. Once trust was gained, they could surge and breach the boat at close range. This approach had been partially attempted by Gold Squadron, who had earlier disguised themselves as Navy sailors and approached under the pretense of resupply. The intel gathered from that close contact proved invaluable, but the risk of triggering the pirates while halfway into a breach was deemed too great for a full-scale takedown attempt. As hours stretched into days, the task force found itself leaning toward an increasingly narrow solution: sniper precision. The plan would rely on the Bainbridge's tow the lifeboat to maintain a stable, predictable range, while Red Squadron's sniper teams rotated around the clock, studying every movement inside. With support from Gray Squadron's intelligence feeds, including UAVs and drones overhead, every second was documented. The goal? Identify a moment when all three pirates would be visible through portholes or the open hatch, and Captain Phillips could be confirmed clear of any trajectory. This approach was not just about marksmanship. It required restraint, discipline, and absolute timing. Every sniper had to know their target's posture, habits, and routines. They had to be confident their shot would be effective and that their teammates would fire within milliseconds. It wasn't one sniper, it was three, synced like a single machine. Meanwhile, negotiations continued. A breakthrough appeared when one pirate was lured onto the Bainbridge under the guise of diplomacy. The second he stepped off the lifeboat, he was detained. This shifted the equation. Now, only 3 pirates remained on board with the hostage. With fewer variables, the risk matrix became slightly more manageable. The strategy was set. No helicopter raid, no beach assault, no underwater demolition. The rescue would come not in the form of boots storming a hatch, but through the still crosshairs of trained snipers, each waiting for the perfect moment. All 3 squadrons now had their defined roles. Gold remained the stabilizing and containment force. Gray continued to monitor ISR and data relay. Red Squadron sat poised, rifles ready, nerves calm, and eyes fixed on their assigned targets. By Easter Sunday, the calm waters of the Indian Ocean had become the backdrop for one of the most calculated hostage rescues in modern special operations history. The tension on the USS Bainbridge was silent, but thick. Every breath, every signal, every shift on deck carried purpose. For days, Red Squadron snipers had taken turns behind their scopes, tracking the pirates' every move. They had logged the intervals when the pirates rotated positions, when they opened the hatch, and when they stood in line to speak to Captain Phillips. They had dialed their optics for wind, distance, and angle. Nothing was left to guesswork. The team aboard the Bainbridge had rehearsed dozens of variations of the mission, but it all came down to a few seconds and a narrow window of visibility. On the command and intelligence side, Gray Squadron remained fully engaged. Through drone feeds, satellite imaging, and constant communication links, they provided minute-by-minute updates. Were the pirates sleeping? Arguing? Moving too close to the hostage? Every bit of data informed whether the green light could be issued. Back in the lifeboat, the psychological pressure was mounting. The 3 remaining pirates were growing erratic. They had been promised safe passage, but the rescue vessels weren't backing down. One of them had been removed from the equation, already lured onto the Bainbridge and quietly detained. That shift had left a gap in the pirates' internal trust. Their sense of control was fading. From a sniper's point of view, the equation was still incomplete. Until all 3 targets were visible and Captain Phillips confirmed safe, there could be no trigger pull. For over 96 hours, the SEALs had waited, but Easter Sunday would deliver the moment they needed. As the sun hovered low on the horizon, shadows fell at the right angle. The lifeboat, still being slowly towed by the Bainbridge, rocked gently, no more than 75 feet behind the destroyer's stern. Inside, the pirates moved into position. One leaned into the hatch, barking instructions. Another stood midship. A third took a step toward the rear. At that precise moment, all 3 were exposed, each visible through a porthole or the open top hatch. Simultaneously, the spotters confirmed the hostage was slumped low and out of the line of fire. The silent command went through comms. 3 snipers, 3 shots. They didn't fire in unison, not exactly, but the timing was so tight, it may as well have been 1. Suppressed rifles cracked in rapid succession. The recoil was minimal. The impact was final. All 3 pirates dropped. Not one had time to move. Not one raised a weapon. Immediately, A Red Squadron breacher, already rigged and ready, fast roped down the tow line directly onto the lifeboat. Without hesitation, he breached the hatch and entered. Inside, he found Captain Richard Phillips hands bound, exhausted but alive. The confirmation was sent, hostage secure. Within minutes, Captain Phillips was transferred to the Bainbridge's deck, flanked by SEALs, medics, and Navy crew. The mission was complete. No casualties on the American side, 0 injuries to the hostage, every objective fulfilled. What followed wasn't celebration. It was execution of post-op protocol. Weapons were secured, bodies were processed. Intelligence material inside the lifeboat, from radios to documents, was logged by Gray Squadron and Navy analysts. The SEALs began their reset, cleaning weapons, repacking gear, submitting field reports. Back in the command center, mission logs were finalized and data transmissions continued to higher command. It was a Tier 1 finish, clean, clinical, exact. There were no photos, no interviews, no chest pounding. Even aboard the Bainbridge, the atmosphere remained reserved. The mission had demanded patience and control, not glory. Each squadron had played a role. Gold Squadron had stabilized the scene from the beginning, laying the groundwork in the first chaotic hours. Gray Squadron had provided the technical scaffolding linking surveillance, communication, and timing into one unified picture. Red Squadron had delivered the final precision, the shot, the breach, the recovery. It was a perfect triangulation of containment, intelligence, and action. Back home, the media would learn only fragments. SEAL snipers, pirates killed Neoistang, captain rescued. The public saw the ending. Few ever knew how many strategies were rehearsed, how many variables calculated, or how many decisions were made in the shadows before that ending could exist. What took place over that 5-day window in the Indian Ocean wasn't just a rescue. It was a validation of Tier 1 readiness, proof that when everything else is uncertain, this community can deliver. And they did. The rescue of Captain Richard Phillips wasn't just a successful operation, it became a defining moment in the modern history of American special operations. Long after the final shot was fired, the effects of that mission rippled outward, from the SEAL teams who executed it, to the Pentagon planners who studied it, to the maritime industry that reevaluated how it dealt with piracy on the high seas. In the immediate aftermath, very little was said publicly. There were no press conferences featuring operators, no details released about the identities of those involved. Internally, however, the operation was seen as a benchmark, a mission that had combined all the elements of Tier 1 capability: rapid deployment, inter-squadron integration, intelligence fusion, and absolute restraint under pressure. For naval special warfare, it was proof that forward-deployed squadrons could adapt to fast-moving, ambiguous crises and still maintain control. The coordination between Gold Squadron's containment and deception tactics, Gray Squadron's intelligence and logistics support, and Red Squadron's final kinetic action was a case study in how special operations forces should function seamlessly, silently, and without fanfare. The mission's success validated a key principle in special operations planning: build flexibility into the strategy. Multiple plans had been considered, rehearsed, and discarded. From fast rope insertions to underwater approaches, every option was studied, not just for tactical effect, but for risk to the hostage. What ultimately succeeded was not the most dramatic plan, but the most measured. It was a reminder that the most effective solution is often the one that leaves the fewest variables to chance. The rescue also reshaped how hostage rescue is approached in maritime environments. For years, piracy off the Horn of Africa had escalated. Shipping companies were unsure how far they could push security. After this operation, the message was clear. The United States had both the will and the means to resolve hostage situations decisively. Merchant fleets began implementing better emergency protocols. Naval task forces increased their patrols in high-risk areas. International cooperation around piracy threats became more robust. Within DevGru, the mission was integrated into training curriculums. Operators studied the details: how Gold Squadron first engaged the situation with limited support, how Red and Gray coordinated mid-ocean jump operations, how communications and ISR synced to create a complete battlespace picture. Not every mission would play out the same way, but the model was strong: layered pressure, deception, intelligence-driven containment, and precision strike capability. Operators who were there don't speak about the mission in terms of glory. They talk about the timing, the hours of waiting, the environmental factors, the communication across teams, and the silence that followed when the job was done. For them, this wasn't a movie plot. It was a moment where everything had to go exactly right, because failure meant death, not just for the hostage, but potentially for the entire team. When the film Captain Phillips was released in 2013, it brought the story into the public consciousness. Tom Hanks's portrayal of Phillips and the final dramatic scenes showing the rescue gave audiences a window into the stakes of the mission. But what the film didn't capture, what it couldn't capture, was the full complexity of what had unfolded behind the scenes. The movie showed the bullets. It didn't show the planning, the restraint, or the men in boats soaking wet, watching for hours through rifle scopes, waiting for a moment that might never come. The mission also affected broader U.S. military policy. It strengthened confidence in using special operations forces for high-risk, time-sensitive scenarios, especially in environments where conventional military force was too blunt a tool. It also led to deeper conversations about how to manage emerging threats like piracy, terrorism at sea, and transnational hostage networks. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of the operation was the reminder that precision, discipline, and patience are sometimes more powerful than overwhelming force. This wasn't an assault on a compound. It was a sniper solution built on days of observation, inter-squadron coordination, and the understanding that sometimes the most heroic action is the one that never has to be seen. To this day, the operation is studied inside Tier 1 units not as an example of bravado, but of mastery. It showed that elite operators could operate across thousands of miles, from jump aircraft to warships in foreign waters under global scrutiny, and still remain invisible until the moment of execution. The hostage was saved, the pirates were eliminated, and no American lives were lost. It was, in every sense, a perfect mission. On June 7, 2006, at precisely 6:15 p.m. local time, two 500-pound bombs dropped from the sky and obliterated a small house in Hib, Iraq. Inside that house was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq and the most hunted man in the country. But his death wasn't the beginning. It was the end. The final act of a long pursuit that stretched across months, required thousands of man-hours, and brought together the sharpest blades in the special operations arsenal. Zarqawi wasn't a typical battlefield commander. He was a symbol, a ruthless ideologue with a taste for brutality that even al-Qaeda leadership in Pakistan viewed as extreme. His group, al-Qaeda in Iraq, was responsible for mass casualty bombings, hostage executions, and an orchestrated campaign to provoke sectarian civil war between Sunni and Shia Muslims. He wasn't hiding in caves. He was operating in Iraq's cities and villages, surrounded by a tight ring of loyalists. He moved constantly. He trusted few. He left no digital trace. That made him incredibly dangerous and incredibly hard to find. To find him, the U.S. built a hammer, Task Force 145. It was a hybrid of the military's most elite special operations units and national intelligence assets. It wasn't just firepower, it was a complete kill chain. At its core, Delta Force handled direct action raids, clearing buildings and neutralizing targets. SEAL Team 6 rotated in for capture-kill missions. CIA Ground Branch worked the human intelligence side, recruiting sources and debriefing captives. NSA tracked cell phones and signal patterns. DIA and JSOC analysts built target packages and mapped networks. 160th SOAR, Night Stalkers, flew helicopters at low altitude under cover of darkness. British SAS added surveillance and urban reconnaissance capability. Every part had a role, and every night, TF-145 went hunting. Dozens of raids, hundreds of interrogations, thousands of files and fragments. Most didn't lead directly to Zarqawi, but they built the picture. By early 2006, analysts noticed a pattern. A low-usage phone number kept showing up near Zarqawi's inner circle. It never stayed on long, but each time it was activated, it appeared within range of past Zarqawi sightings. NSA teams began mapping that phone's signals. After weeks of careful triangulation, it consistently pinged near Baqaba, northeast of Baghdad. The focus narrowed to a village on the edge of farmland. Hib. Now came the next step. Persistent surveillance. MQ-1 Predator drones circled silently over the area, watching a small walled compound. Men came and went. No women, no children. Vehicle traffic was minimal, controlled. Visitors stayed briefly. Everything about it said high-value target. Then came the human intelligence. 2 captured AQI members were interrogated by CIA officers embedded with JSOC. They both pointed to Hib. One described a safe house that matched the compound on the drone feed. The intelligence picture clicked into place. June 7th, 2006, just after 6 p.m. Surveillance showed a group entering the compound. One individual was tall, stocky, and moved like someone with authority. A known Zarqawi-linked phone number lit up inside the house. At Balad Air Base, the Joint Operations Center initiated final targeting procedures. JSOC's intelligence officers confirmed 3 sources: drone feed, SIGINT, and HUMANT. It was as good a match as they'd ever had. Lieutenant General Stanley McChrystal approved the strike. 2 F-16Cs were already in the air flying over central Iraq. Each was loaded with a GBU-12 Pavway-2, a 500-pound laser-guided bomb. Final coordinates were uploaded. The Predator lased the target. At 6:15 p.m., both bombs hit. One struck the center of the house, the second followed milliseconds later, collapsing the remaining structure. In under 5 seconds, the safe house was gone. Minutes later, 2 MH-60L Black Hawks lifted from a forward staging area. Inside were Delta Force operators, medics, an intelligence team, and an Air Force combat controller. They landed in a field near the blast zone and moved in. The compound was smoking rubble, no gunfire, no resistance. Inside the debris, the team located several bodies. One man was still alive, badly wounded, semi-conscious. He was pulled out and stabilized temporarily, but he died moments later from internal trauma. His face, however, was mostly intact. On-site biometric scanners were deployed. Delta's intel officer took fingerprints. A mobile database was pinged via satellite. The match came back quickly. Zarqawi. Facial recognition confirmed it. DNA would follow later. But the body, the location, and the intelligence all aligned. The world's most wanted terrorist was dead. Back at Balad, the mood was focused, not celebratory. This was a mission accomplished, but not a war won. Photos were taken, reports compiled. The kill was confirmed to higher command and eventually the public. For Task Force 145, it was the culmination of a long, grinding campaign. For the wider war effort, it was a powerful message. No one is untouchable, but there was still more to come. Because Zarqawi's death was a turning point and a test. Zarqawi was dead. The most hunted man in Iraq, eliminated by precision air power and boots-on-ground confirmation. The raid was a textbook example of joint targeting success, from intelligence fusion to kinetic execution. But killing a man is not the same as killing a movement. Within hours of the strike, U.S. commanders acknowledged the success. News broke in Washington, the president addressed the nation. But for Task Force 145, there was no pause. There was no victory lap. The very same night, they were back in the field, because they knew what others would soon learn. The war wasn't over. It was evolving. Within hours of the airstrike in Hib, Task Force 145 launched follow-on operations to exploit momentum and disrupt AQI's command structure. The intelligence gathered from Zarqawi's safe house phones, maps, handwritten notes pointed to 2 new targets. The first was a known meeting site in the Diyala province. Delta Force operators inserted under cover of darkness, cleared the structure, and killed 4 mid-level AQI commanders. No prisoners, no resistance. Clean execution. The second site was a logistics hub closer to Baghdad. SEAL Team 6, working in tandem with Iraqi Special Police, raided the location and recovered encrypted laptops, bomb-making materials, and documents outlining routes used by foreign fighters crossing from Syria. This was standard doctrine: strike the head, then dismantle the limbs. U.S. forces released high-resolution images of Zarqawi's face post-mortem but intact. This wasn't just for proof. It was psychological warfare. Zarqawi had cultivated a mythical status. His videos were dark and dramatic, his voice calm and threatening. He was the faceless architect of chaos until now. By showing the world his death, the coalition aimed to shatter that myth, to demoralize his followers and show Iraqis that the most feared man in the country was gone. But Al-Qaeda had planned for this. Just 18 days after Zarqawi's death, Al-Qaeda in Iraq announced a new leader, Abu Ayyub al-Masri, an Egyptian-born jihadist and longtime associate of Al-Qaeda Central. Where Zarqawi was brutal and charismatic, al-Masri was quiet and methodical. He wasn't interested in flashy videos. His specialty was logistics, coordination, and building deep insurgent networks, the kind that survive when leadership is targeted. Under his watch, Al-Qaeda in Iraq changed shape. Zarqawi thrived on high-visibility attacks, car bombs in markets, kidnappings of journalists, executions on tape. But after his death, the group shifted focus. They moved into IED networks, assassination squads, and covert infiltration of Iraqi army and police. They built systems instead of spectacles. They stopped broadcasting and started embedding. By 2007, their structure had become more decentralized but harder to kill. With foreign fighters still flowing in, AQI morphed into something more dangerous: the Islamic State of Iraq, a rebranded insurgency with long-term goals. Zarqawi was dead, but the system he created had adapted. JSOC didn't stand still. With the momentum of Zarqawi's death, Task Force 145 was renamed Task Force 88 and surged its operational tempo. Intel cycles shortened. Raids became more frequent. The concept was now fully in motion. Find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, repeat. Operators from Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and ISA conducted missions every single night. They used intelligence gathered from one raid to launch the next, sometimes within hours. ISR aircraft like Predators and Reapers provided real-time video. Human intelligence teams built local networks. SIGINT teams intercepted low-level chatter. And special operations units hit targets before the enemy could relocate. This tempo would later become the gold standard for manhunting operations worldwide. Around the same time, the broader surge strategy was launched across Iraq, an increase of 20,000 U.S. troops to stabilize key areas like Baghdad and Anbar province. While conventional forces secured cities and trained Iraqi units, JSOC handled the shadow war. Their job? Remove leadership and pressure the insurgency from the top down. The coordination between conventional and special operations forces, which had been rocky in earlier years, now became seamless. Commanders shared targeting data. Intel flowed both ways, and it worked. By late 2007, violence in Iraq had dropped significantly. AQI was fractured, scattered, and on the defensive, but it wasn't over. Zarqawi's death proved something critical. You don't need to fight large-scale battles to destroy an enemy. If you can track their leaders, understand their networks, and strike precisely, you can cripple an entire organization with minimal footprint. This became the model for future operations, from Pakistan to Yemen to Syria. You start with surveillance, layer in signal intelligence, build a pattern of life, then wait and strike at the right moment. It requires patience, coordination, and surgical execution, and that's what JSOC delivered. Zarqawi's death removed a brutal figure from the battlefield. It showed what modern joint force warfare could do, but it also revealed the limits of kinetic success. Killing a man is easy. Killing an idea is harder. Zarqawi's ideology, sectarian hatred, hyper-violence, religious justification for mass killing, would outlive him. The group he founded would later evolve into ISIS, the most brutal terrorist army the world had seen in decades. Some of the same routes, same safe houses, same towns, all used again years later by a new wave of extremists, many of them inspired by Zarqawi's legacy. The strike in Hib was more than just a successful mission. It was a case study in how intelligence, technology, and special operations can converge with perfect timing. It didn't end the war, but it changed how the war was fought. The death of Zarqawi was a tactical success, a strategic signal, and a moral statement that even the most feared enemies can be found. His house was reduced to rubble, his body buried in secrecy, his name recorded in history. But the fight and the methods continued. This was the death of Zarqawi, but the war went on in the shadows. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment so you don't miss out. When Donald Trump entered the White House in 2017, one of the first crises waiting for him was North Korea. Kim Jong-un had already tested nuclear weapons, paraded long-range missiles, and taunted the United States with threats of destruction. Trump's response swung between personal insults on Twitter and carefully staged moments of diplomacy. In the background, America's intelligence agencies struggled with a glaring weakness. Despite decades of effort, they had almost no reliable sources inside North Korea. Satellite images could reveal missile launch sites or troop movements, but they could not explain Kim's intentions. Human spies were nearly impossible to recruit in a country where the regime watched every citizen. Signals intelligence, the interception of phone calls or digital communications, was blocked by one of the most tightly controlled networks on Earth. For American decision-makers, North Korea was a dangerous blind spot. In 2018, as nuclear negotiations crept forward, a new opportunity appeared. Engineers had developed a small but powerful device that could intercept and relay encrypted communications if placed near the right nodes in North Korea's networks. It was not the kind of thing satellites or drones could deliver. Someone had to plant it by hand in the dead of night, on hostile soil. That task fell to the most secretive warriors in the U.S. arsenal, SEAL Team 6. Officially known as the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, or DEVGRU, Team 6 was famous for the 2011 raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Within DEVGRU, the Red Squadron was selected. These men had a reputation for aggression and daring, the sort of operators who could be trusted with missions that bordered on impossible, but they would not go alone. To get ashore, they needed specialists in undersea infiltration. That role belonged to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1, or SDV-1, based in Pearl Harbor. For decades, SDV-1 had mastered the art of piloting mini-submarines or wet subs that allowed SEALs to slip undetected beneath harbors and coastlines. The partnership of Red Squadron and SDV-1 created a hybrid task force, shooters trained for violence of action, and pilots trained for silent entry through the sea. Preparation began in late 2018 once President Trump personally signed the order. The SEALs were told that this mission was more politically sensitive than almost anything since the bin Laden raid. If things went wrong, they might not only be killed or captured, but could trigger a war between two nuclear powers. The rehearsals were relentless. In freezing waters off the American coast, SDV-1 crews practiced hours-long dives in mini-subs, while Red Squadron operators waited crammed in the back, soaked to the bone. They rehearsed surfacing, stripping out of diving gear, moving with weapons through rocky terrain, and then reversing the process under pressure. They tested the new listening device, light images for months, memorizing when small boats appeared, when lights flickered in villages, when tides left rocks exposed. It was the best they could do without drones overhead. Inside Red Squadron, the mood was serious but confident. These were men accustomed to operating in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, places where firefights and raids were the daily rhythm of war. But North Korea was different. Here, failure could not be patched over by airstrikes or reinforcements. Capture would mean torture, show trials, and potentially the collapse of nuclear negotiations. The men joked grimly about being pawns in a geopolitical game, but the reality weighed on them. By early 2019, as Trump prepared for a summit with Kim in Vietnam, the plan was finalized. A nuclear-powered submarine, almost 2 football fields long, would carry the strike team into the waters off North Korea. From there, SDV-1 pilots would launch 2 wet subs, each carrying several Red Squadron operators. After 2 hours submerged in 40-degree water, the SEALs would surface near shore, swim in silently, plant the device, and return before dawn. It was a mission built on thin margins and absolute trust. Every man knew that even the smallest mistake, a noisy splash, a misplaced sub, a fisherman in the wrong place could unravel months of preparation. As February opened, the final order was given. Trump approved the launch. The submarine went dark, entering a communications blackout as it crept closer to enemy waters. In the belly of the vessel, the Red Squadron operators checked their gear one last time. Unmarked rifles, ammunition that could never be traced, dive equipment packed tight. The SDV-1 pilots reviewed navigation points, each second plotted against currents and tides. Hours later, the hatches opened. Cold water rushed in. The SEALs slid into their mini-subs, huddled in silence as the presidency began. A mission into darkness that demanded everything and promised nothing. The submarine crept through the Pacific depths, its nuclear engines throttled low to reduce noise. Every man aboard knew they were entering one of the most surveilled maritime zones in the world. North Korea stood the misery that awaited them. The ride would last nearly 2 hours in 40-degree water. Muscles would cramp, faces would burn with cold. Communication between subs would be hand signals and muffled radio clicks, nothing more. But all of that had been rehearsed. What had not been rehearsed was what would happen if anything unexpected appeared in their path. When the captain announced the final approach, the submarine entered total communications blackout. No one topside in Washington could reach them now. The operators exchanged quiet nods. This was it. The hatches opened, seawater flooding into the bay. One by one, the two mini-subs slid free of the mother vessel. Their small electric motors purred, barely louder than the ocean itself. The cockpits sealed, gauges flickered, and the pilots eased the craft into formation. Behind them, the submarine disappeared into the black, leaving only the faint trace of bubbles. Inside the wet subs, Red Squadron sat rigid, rifles pressed tight, eyes closed against the sting of salt water. They trusted the SDV-1 pilots, men who had spent careers mastering underwater infiltration. These pilots knew how to read sonar-like language, how to feel the pulse of the sea against the hull, how to navigate by nothing but compass and instinct. For an hour, the mini-subs crept forward. Through their night vision goggles, the SEALs could see little more than outlines of rocks and the faint glow of phosphorescent plankton. The coastline loomed closer. So far, the intelligence had been correct. No patrol boats, no radar sweeps, no lights on shore. But special operations missions live in the gap between prediction and reality. As the first sub settled onto the seafloor at the designated parking site, everything seemed on schedule. The second sub, however, overshot its mark. In the darkness, the pilot had misjudged the current. He was forced to circle back, turning the craft so that when it finally stopped, it faced the wrong direction. It was a small error, the kind of thing that could be corrected later. But in an operation where silence and precision meant survival, even small errors had weight. With time slipping away, the shore team decided not to wait. The sliding doors opened, and the SEALs slipped into the frigid water. They kicked silently toward the surface, rifles slung tight, packs carrying the listening device tethered to their sides. Every few yards, they surfaced just enough to scan the horizon with goggles. Nothing. The shore appeared empty, just as intelligence had promised. They crawled onto the rocks, stripped out of their dive gear, and checked weapons. Unmarked rifles, ammunition without stampings. Each man a ghost, armed for a mission that officially did not exist. Their target lay only a few hundred yards inland. If they moved quickly and quietly, they could install the device and vanish before anyone knew they had come. But the sea had other plans. Distance distorted by refraction, it seemed harmless. But from the perspective of the shore team, the boat was practically on top of the subs. In the dark, featureless sea, proximity became guesswork. With radios silent, no one could clarify the threat. The SEALs were on their own, forced to interpret the situation without command oversight. Was it a patrol deliberately searching for intruders? Or simply fishermen in the wrong place at the wrong time? A splash broke the tension. One of the North Koreans had entered the water. To the SEALs, this felt like discovery. Every operator knew the rule drilled into them for months. If compromised, abort immediately. But there was another rule, equally clear. No witnesses. If anyone saw them, the entire mission and perhaps international stability itself could collapse. The senior enlisted SEALs on shore raised his weapon. He did not need to speak. He simply centered his rifle and fired. Suppressed shots cracked the silence. Other SEALs followed instinctively, cutting down the figures on the boat before they could react. The silence of the sea was shattered. The mission had just entered a new phase, one no rehearsal could prepare them for. The suppressed gunfire snapped across the waves, short bursts that to any bystander might have sounded like nothing more than the sea breaking on rocks. But for the men on the beach, it was the sound of a mission collapsing. Their rifles lowered, eyes scanning, the SEALs felt the heavy truth settle. They had been forced to act. The rules had been drilled into them for months. If compromised, abort immediately. But aborting was not as simple as turning around. To survive, and to preserve the secrecy of the operation, they could not allow themselves to be seen. The boat that had drifted so close, its flashlights cutting across the surface, had become the single greatest threat to the entire mission. If those men had spotted the subs, or worse, seen armed Americans waiting ashore, the fallout would have been immediate. Radio calls to shore, security alerts, and soon a swarm of soldiers converging on their position. The shore team swam fast toward the vessel. Their movements were sharp, hurried, driven by the urgency of the moment. When they climbed aboard, it became clear that the people they had shot were not uniformed troops. No weapons, no radios, no insignia. Just heavy wetsuits, primitive dive gear, and baskets. Shellfish divers. Civilians who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. For a brief moment, there was silence. Some of the operators let the reality sink in. Their mission, to plant a listening device, had just turned into a desperate struggle to escape without triggering a war. They could not stay. The decision was immediate. Time lost here meant North Korean patrols had more chance to converge. If the divers had seen anything on detection by sonar and radar, or abandoned the men to fend for themselves, there was no hesitation. He ordered the vessel into shallower waters, throttling forward despite the danger. For long minutes, the SEALs clung to the wet subs, the black hull of the submarine finally looming above them like a wall of steel. Hatches opened, crew rushed to pull them in. The mini-subs were dragged back into their cradles, dripping as the last operator hauled himself through the hatch. The submarine wasted no time. Its engines surged, carrying it back into deeper waters. The mission was over. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The Red Squadron operators stripped out of soaked wetsuits, their bodies trembling from the hours in frigid water. The SDV-1 pilots sat in silence, replaying every detail. The overshoot on insertion, the repositioning maneuver, the cockpit lights. Each small deviation now seemed monumental. The debrief began almost immediately. What had gone wrong? Some argued that the boat had simply been bad luck, civilians in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Others pointed to the small mistakes, the misaligned subs, the decision to correct position with cockpit lights open. None of it changed the outcome. The device remained unplanted. The mission had failed. But beyond failure lay the greater question: what would the North Koreans conclude? Hours later, confirmation arrived from U.S. satellites. Activity along the coast had spiked. Convoys of trucks rolled toward the shoreline. Communications flared between local bases. Patrols fanned out into the water. But there were no public statements, no accusations, no threats of retaliation. The silence was unsettling. Perhaps Pyongyang believed its divers had drowned in an accident. Perhaps it suspected more, but chose not to escalate. Either way, the risk of exposure still loomed. Back in Washington, the timing was delicate. President Trump was days away from a summit with Kim Jong-un in Hanoi. Canceling would raise questions. Proceeding might risk walking into a trap if Kim knew what had happened. The White House chose the path of silence. The mission would not be acknowledged to Congress. No word would be shared with oversight committees. To the world, it had never taken place. For the operators, though, it could not be erased. Months of rehearsal, endless dives in cold seas, careful preparation all undone in a single encounter with a civilian boat. The knowledge weighed heavily. Special operations thrived on precision, yet here, despite all their skill, the margin for error had been razor thin. And yet, every man knew this was part of the game. Not every mission goes as planned. Sometimes the smallest chance encounter can unravel months of work. For every failure that leaks into the public eye, there are countless missions that succeed in silence operations that never make headlines. Achievements hidden behind layers of classification. SEAL Team 6. Should units like SEAL Team 6 continue to shoulder such high-risk clandestine tasks, missions that could ignite international crises? Or should they be reserved for more traditional roles like direct action raids and hostage rescues? Within Red Squadron and SDV-1, the answer was simple. They had done their job. They had trained relentlessly, executed with discipline, and reacted as best they could when fate intervened. No mission was ever guaranteed. Not every plan survived contact with reality. Operators accepted that risk when they donned their gear. To them, what mattered most was that everyone had made it out alive. But in Washington, politics demanded a different calculus. Trump's administration kept the mission buried. No mention was made to the oversight committees. No acknowledgement was given to the families of the civilians who had been killed. And no lessons were shared with the broader public. Afghanistan, December 2012. Dr. Dilip Joseph wasn't a soldier. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was an American humanitarian, working with an NGO to bring medical care to remote villages in eastern Afghanistan. That morning, he and two Afghan colleagues had finished their visit to a rural clinic in the mountains of Laden province. They were headed back toward Kabul in an unarmored vehicle. No military escort, no backup. They had done this before many times without issue, but this time, they never made it back. A group of Taliban fighters ambushed their vehicle. The road was isolated, surveillance was minimal, and the Taliban were waiting. The men were ordered out of the car at gunpoint, searched, blindfolded, and marched off the road, disappearing into the hills. The kidnappers quickly realized they had a high-value hostage, an American doctor. He was separated from his colleagues and moved through a network of hideouts in the mountainous terrain of Kargahi district. For Dr. Joseph, the ordeal was just beginning. For the U.S. military, a race against time had just begun. When the report came in an American civilian kidnapped by the Taliban, the U.S. Embassy and military command sprang into action. The clock was ticking. With every hour, the risk of Dr. Joseph being executed, moved to Pakistan, or used as a bargaining chip grew. GSOC Joint Special Operations Command took the lead. Within hours, intelligence assets were mobilized. Drones, SIGINT, and informant networks worked to triangulate his location. Intercepted communications indicated that he was being held in a mud-walled compound in the mountains guarded by heavily armed Taliban fighters. No one knew how long he would stay in one place. The risk of him being moved or killed was extremely high. A decision was made. This would not be a negotiation. This would be a rescue. The mission was assigned to DevGru, more commonly known as SEAL Team 6. Among the operators preparing for deployment were Petty Officer First Class Nicholas Cheke and Senior Chief Edward Byers, Jr. Both were highly experienced. Both had participated in multiple high-risk missions across Iraq and Afghanistan, and both knew the danger of hostage rescues. Small rooms, close quarters, enemy shooters with fingers on the trigger, one mistake, and the hostage could be dead in seconds. Their job was to go in fast, eliminate the threat, and bring the hostage home. The team began rehearsing their approach and assault, working from satellite imagery and whatever intel they had. The building was primitive mud walls, likely one large room, maybe two. 5 to 6 guards, no margin for error. Late at night, under complete darkness, a MH-47 helicopter lifted off carrying the SEALs. They flew low over the rugged landscape of eastern Afghanistan, dodging detection. The landing zone was miles from the target, a deliberate choice to reduce noise and visibility. Once on the ground, the team began a fast, stealthy movement across rocky terrain. Fully geared, each man carried night vision, body armor, weapons, breaching tools, and medical kits. The hike took hours. It was freezing. The night was silent. Finally, they approached the compound. They were less than 100 feet away when the mission changed. A Taliban guard spotted movement. He raised the alarm. The SEALs now had seconds to act before the hostage could be harmed. Petty Officer Nicholas Cheke was first through the entrance. A doorway covered by thick blankets meant to muffle sound and block light. He burst in, immediately encountering hostile fire. He was hit. The rest of the team surged forward. Senior Chief Edward Byers followed Cheke into the darkness, rifle at the ready, heart pounding. Inside the room was chaos. 5 armed fighters, 1 hostage. No lights, no space. Byers had seconds to assess, decide, and act. As the SEALs breached the doorway, chaos exploded inside the small compound. The room was barely lit, just enough for night vision to give ghost-like images of shadowy figures moving in a blur. Dust, gunfire, screams. Petty Officer Nicholas Cheke had led the charge, crashing through the entrance. He took fire immediately from close range. Hit badly, he collapsed inside the room. Seconds behind him, Senior Chief Edward Byers entered. What he did next would become one of the most heroic moments in modern special operations history. There were at least 5 Taliban fighters inside the room. One was reaching for a weapon. Another was yelling commands. A third moved toward a shape in the corner, Dr. Dilip Joseph. Byers didn't hesitate. He shot the first enemy he encountered. In one movement, he tackled another fighter who was lunging toward the hostage, wrestling him to the ground and holding him down by the throat. Then he heard something, a voice in English. Byers called out, demanding the hostage identify himself. A voice answered from the corner. "It's me. I'm here. I'm the doctor." Byers rushed over, throwing his body across Dr. Joseph to shield him from stray bullets or suicide vests. Anything. At that point, the room was still not secure. A Taliban fighter suddenly rose up behind Byers. Another SEAL quickly fired, eliminating the threat. In the middle of this storm, Dr. Joseph clung to life beneath Byers, protected by a man he had never met. With all threats neutralized, the SEALs swept the rest of the building and confirmed no additional combatants remained. The hostage was alive and miraculously uninjured, but one of their own was down, Petty Officer Nicholas Cheke. Time was critical. As one team worked on stabilizing the hostage, others rushed to assist Cheke. He was badly wounded and unresponsive. The decision was made to extract immediately. A medevac was called, and the team began a fast exfil under night cover. The helicopter ride out of the valley was silent. Dr. Joseph sat stunned, still processing what had happened. Beside him, a SEAL medic worked furiously to save Cheke's life. Despite their efforts, Petty Officer Nicholas Cheke was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at Bagram Air Base. He was 28 years old, a highly trained operator, a warrior who had charged into darkness to save a man he never knew. His sacrifice made the mission a success. Dr. Joseph survived. Because of Cheke, because of Byers, because of an entire team willing to risk everything. Dr. Dilip Joseph was safely returned to his family after several days of debriefing and medical evaluation. He later published a memoir titled Kidnapped by the Taliban, describing his ordeal and the incredible bravery of the men who rescued him. But for the SEAL community, the price was deeply personal. Nicholas Cheke was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, one of the highest awards for valor in combat. His courage in breaching the room under fire, knowing the risk, saved lives. Senior Chief Edward Byers was awarded the Medal of Honor. In 2016, President Obama presented him the medal, noting his extraordinary heroism, tactical skill, and composure under fire. Byers became one of the few living recipients of the Medal of Honor in the global war on terror. He was the second Navy SEAL ever to receive the Medal of Honor for actions in Afghanistan. In the years since, the story of that mission has inspired many. But most of what happened, how the intel was gathered, the movements of the team, the names of other operators will remain classified. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment so you don't miss out. On October 5th, 2013, before dawn broke over the Somali coast, a team of elite U.S. special operators emerged from the Indian Ocean surf. Their objective was clear: conduct a precision raid on a high-value al-Shabaab target hiding in a well-defended building near the port town of Barawa. This was not a routine mission. It was approved at the highest levels of the U.S. government, a direct response to terror. Just weeks earlier, al-Shabaab militants had stormed Westgate Mall in Nairobi, killing 71 people in cold blood, including civilians from multiple nations. Among the dead were women and children trapped and executed in stores and cafes. Intelligence indicated that one of the key planners of that attack had fled south into Somalia. U.S. agencies had been tracking his movements, and the opportunity finally presented itself. A short window to strike him before he vanished again into the interior. The individual targeted in the raid was known to be a senior figure within al-Shabaab's Amniyat, the group's intelligence and external operations wing. He was described as a foreign fighter with deep operational ties, someone who trained militants, organized logistics, and coordinated attacks beyond Somalia's borders. This was not just another mid-level commander. His fingerprints were on international terror plots, including attempted attacks on Western embassies and infrastructure. The Westgate attack changed everything. Political pressure mounted. Interagency intelligence sharing intensified. The manhunt began. It started with fragments. Signals intelligence from U.S. and allied sources picked up unusual cell phone activity moving along the southern Somali coast. Intercepts from known al-Shabaab couriers hinted at a meeting near Barawa, a known stronghold and port used for arms smuggling and foreign fighter transit. Surveillance aircraft began persistent pattern-of-life monitoring, tracking foot traffic, vehicles, and power usage. Drones identified a walled compound near the beach with reinforced walls, armed sentries, and limited civilian movement. The building's security posture didn't match the surrounding structures. Then came human intelligence. Reports from Somali assets indicating that a high-value foreign operative had recently arrived in the town accompanied by a tight group of loyal fighters. The descriptions matched the man responsible for Westgate. There was no time to wait. The target was considered mobile. The longer they delayed, the greater the chance he would vanish inland. The tasking went to a Tier 1 Special Mission Unit with extensive experience in high-risk, limited-footprint maritime operations. Members of Red Squadron, a seasoned assault troop within that unit, were selected for the mission. They trained and rehearsed for days, going over schematics, entry points, known defenses, escape plans, and contingencies. But the approach would be one of the hardest parts. Amphibious infiltration under cover of darkness. The team would swim in from offshore, carrying gear and explosives, landing silently near the target building before launching the assault. Every movement would be silent, every mistake potentially fatal. Quick pause before we continue. If you're enjoying the video so far and want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. You'll get some awesome perks like exclusive content, early access to videos, and more. Just hit the join button below or check the description, and Special Ops 6 is now live. If you're into elite gear, field-ready morale patches, and real operator culture, this is for you. Tap the link in the description or head to the channel and click the store link. Join the team, grab your gear, and support the mission, and let's get back to it. The team entered the water under complete blackout. Swimming through a slaughterhouse runoff, they pushed toward the beach through shark-infested, polluted water. Visibility was near zero. Every fin stroke mattered. This wasn't training, the stakes were real. The men pushed through exhaustion, emerged on shore, and silently assembled at the breach point. Intel had described the structure as a beachside house where the target watched TV and relaxed. That intelligence would soon prove dangerously optimistic. The reality on the ground was different. The target compound wasn't a bungalow. It was a fortress, reinforced, windowless from the outside, and constructed for defense. The team scaled the outer gate silently, disabling early warning systems rigged with string lines and wires. But the moment they moved toward the main entry, they were engaged from the rooftop. Automatic fire erupted from above. One round glanced off a team member's helmet, narrowly missing a kill shot. The compound lit up. The defenders had been expecting this, and they were ready. Inside, the doors were barricaded, reinforced, solid. The operators had charges prepared, but even that wouldn't make entry easy. The building was walled shut. There were no visible hinges, no handles, nothing to grab. It was a designed kill box. As the team moved up to assault the front, a figure inside unleashed a torrent of automatic fire through the door. Splinters and tracer rounds lit the night. The team split to either side, caught in a deadly standoff. One operator prepped a breaching charge under fire, timing it between bursts. He knew he couldn't stand and run. He would have to eat the blast. With no cover, no corners, and no second chances, he stuck the charge and detonated it at close range. The door didn't blow open, it blew apart, barely. A hole waist-high was punched through the structure, but what lay behind was worse. A sandbagged fighting position with a belt-fed machine gunner laying down constant fire down the hall. Grenades began coming through the hole from inside. Accurate, controlled, the team was now stuck between the gate and the structure, taking fire from multiple directions. One operator attempted to crawl through the blown opening, believing his teammate had already gone in alone. He was pulled back by his team leader. Above them, another team was fighting on the second story, facing the same storm of bullets and chaos. The rooftop team was also engaged from multiple angles, and the worst was yet to come. A Somali QRF, quick reaction force, friendly to Al-Shabaab, was en route. Technicals, pickup trucks with mounted weapons, were racing toward the compound. Time was gone. The mission had shifted from capture to survive and exfil. The only exit was the same as their entry. Straight back out the gate, directly through the line of fire. The team began prepping one final overpressure charge, using the last remaining breaching explosive in a final effort to suppress the enemy. Grenades were traded, ammunition was low, concussion and fragmentation had taken their toll. The call was made, exfil was coming. They would launch one final blast, suppress the belt fed, and run for their lives. The mission had shifted. What began as a presidentially approved capture operation had turned into a fight for survival. The operators were trapped. The courtyard was hot with gunfire from multiple directions. Every second spent outside the target building invited another burst from inside. Belt-fed fire cutting across the entry point, and grenades launched with practiced accuracy. To make matters worse, enemy reinforcements were closing in. Al-Shabaab's QRF, riding and technicals, was now confirmed inbound. There was no time left. The operators had one choice: blast a path out or die trying. The team leader gave the order, prepped the last overpressure breaching charge, a massive concussion device normally reserved for hardened barricades. The blast radius would be severe. The team had no solid cover. But with defenders dug in and the exit point locked down by fire, it was their only chance. Operators on the line did the math in their heads. Distance, overpressure, fragmentation. They'd trained for this, and they knew the risks. One man leaned out, eyes barely exposed beyond the wall, trying to get a final look at the enemy position. He spotted the muzzle flash. Timing had to be perfect. They launched the charge, a T-bomb, manually thrown across the kill zone. It was caught midair, unwrapped on the fly, armed, and thrown forward into the enemy's position. 3 seconds. 2, 1. The compound shook. The blast wave knocked the breacher completely off the porch. Ears went numb. Pressure punched through chests. The hallway was torn open, enough to disrupt the machine gunner's position for just a second. That second was all they needed. The only way out was straight through the kill zone, the same way they came in, directly in line with the sandbag gunner. Still alive, still firing. One by one, the team ran the gauntlet. The gate was blocked. There was no time to unlock it. One of the largest men on the team lowered his shoulder and blasted through, snapping the gate wide open with brute force. The team surged through, under fire. Tracer rounds chewed up the wall behind them. They never stopped firing back, covering their teammates as they moved. No one slowed down, no one turned around. Despite taking concussive hits from the charge, every operator made it out of the compound. But the mission wasn't over. Now came the most dangerous part of all, the sea. The extract platform was waiting offshore. Rigid-hulled boats and jet skis meant to get the team back to a mothership operating in international waters. But the surf was brutal. Waves capsized platforms. Zodiac boats flipped. In the confusion, some team members became separated in the dark. Operators began swimming for their lives. Some wrapped tow lines around their wrists to be dragged out by boats. One man was spun so violently, he dislocated his shoulder and lost use of his arm mid-swim. When he tried again with the other arm, it dislocated too. Now he was floating disabled, in full kit, in open water. Another operator was thrown from a jet ski with such force that it damaged his hip sockets. He couldn't kick, couldn't move. He had to be towed, dead weight, by his swim buddy. Others turned on infrared strobes, signaling pickup points. The chaos was total. Waves, shouting, spinning propellers, equipment floating away, and the looming threat of enemy fire. Eventually, all surviving team members were pulled aboard recovery craft. They returned to the mothership bruised, battered, and burned, but alive. Once back on board, medics began immediate triage. Operators were stripped of their gear. Their bodies were covered in metal fragments, not embedded but coating their skin. Eyes, ears, even between fingers and underbody armor. Shrapnel dust, a fine metallic mist from grenades and walls torn apart. Everyone was severely concussed, hearing loss, headaches, disorientation, but miraculously none of the fragments had pierced vital organs. As one operator later put it, it was like God said, "Not today." Despite the ferocity of the fight, the high-value target was not captured. It remains unclear whether he was killed in the compound or escaped during the chaos. For political reasons, the team had been ordered to bring him back alive, a rare constraint in a target like this. But in Somalia, when a man refuses to surrender and his building becomes a fortress, capture becomes nearly impossible. The operators were ready to risk their lives to get him. They built plans around it. But there are moments in combat where the mission must change, where survival takes priority. This was one of those nights. One of the key takeaways from Barawa was the gap between intelligence reporting and ground truth. The target building was described in intel reports as a beachside residence where the suspect watched TV and relaxed. Nothing suggested a hardened stronghold with rooftop defenses, machine gun nests, and layered barricades. But that's exactly what the operators found. A building designed to channel attackers into kill zones. The contrast between what was expected and what was real nearly cost lives. It reinforced a hard truth in special operations. No plan survives first contact, and even the best prepared mission can turn to chaos in seconds. The Barawa raid wasn't a failure, it was a harsh lesson. It exposed al-Shabaab's tactical evolution, their ability to prepare for direct action raids, and the real dangers of urban combat in denied environments. It also revealed the limitations of intelligence. The enemy had learned, they built traps, they trained defenders, they weren't just hiding, they were waiting. Despite the challenges every operator made it home, that alone is a success. But the target remained at large. The war on terror had shifted. The men who fought in Barawa knew it, and they knew they'd be back. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment so you don't miss out.